She was one of the most electric presences in the history of American cinema. She made Bonnie and Clyde at 26 and changed what a female performance could be. She made Chinatown at 33 alongside Jack Nicholson and became something even the word great doesn't quite cover. She won the Oscar for Network at 35 and accepted it in one of the most celebrated nights in Academy Award history. But Faye Dunaway's private life was a different kind of story entirely. The woman who played Bonnie Parker and Evelyn Mulray and Diana Christensen, women of enormous willfulness and electric danger, was, in her personal life, someone trying to figure out how to hold a marriage together while being one of the most demanding and most in-demand actresses on earth. She married twice. Both marriages ended in divorce. The stories of how they began and how they ended are full of the specific complications that extraordinary fame and extraordinary personality produce. And they reveal something about who Faye Dunaway was, beneath the image she projected for 60 years of public life. Bascom, Florida, and the making of Faye Dunaway. The woman who became Faye Dunaway started in circumstances that had nothing to do with glamour. She was born Dorothy Faye Dunaway on January 14, 1941, in Bascom, Florida, a small town in the Florida Panhandle of the kind that exists on the margins of American consciousness, not quite southern enough for the Deep South mythology, and not quite anywhere enough to have a mythology of its own. The town had a post office and a church, and the specific quality of rural remoteness that was, for the children who grew up there, simply the given condition of their world. Her father, John McDowell Dunaway Jr., was a career non-commissioned officer in the United States Army. This meant a childhood organized around the military, around bases, around frequent moves, around the specific institutional atmosphere of Army life in the 1940s and 1950s that shapes children in particular ways. You learn adaptability because you have no choice but to learn it. You learn to read new environments quickly because you are always in a new environment. You develop a quality of self-reliance because the social world you are moving through is always new, and you cannot depend on the continuity of old friendships and familiar places to sustain you. Army children develop a specific kind of resilience that is bought at a specific kind of cost. The perpetual starting over, the friendships made and then abandoned by the next set of orders, the household that moves rather than accumulates the sedimentary layers of belonging. Her mother, Grace April Smith Dunaway, was a housewife. Her parents had married as teenagers in 1939 and divorced in 1955, when Faye was 14. She had a younger brother, Mac, who eventually became a lawyer. The divorce was one of those mid-century American events that happened in families and was managed with the available silence, the specific 1950s style of handling family dissolution that prioritized the appearance of normality over the emotional acknowledgement of what was actually happening. The children absorbed it in the particular way that children absorb the things the adults around them cannot fully address, by carrying it, unprocessed, into the years ahead. What the childhood gave her, alongside its disruptions, was a quality of determination that the people who worked with her throughout her career consistently recognized. She was not a woman who had been handed things. She was a woman who had understood early that she would have to make her own way, that the environment around her was not going to stay stable long enough to carry her, and that the only reliable resource was whatever she could develop inside herself. That quality of internal resource, of not requiring the external world to be stable because the only stability available was the internal kind, was visible in everything she did for the rest of her life. She studied at Florida State University and the University of Florida before earning her BFA in theater from Boston University in 1962. The Boston University theater program was serious, training students in the full technical range of theatrical performance not celebrity shortcuts. From Boston, she went to the Lincoln Center Repertory Theatre Training Program in New York, where Elia Kazan was among the directors working with the young company. Kazan's approach required actors to bring their genuine interior lives into the work with a completeness that formal technique alone cannot produce. Faye Dunaway's genuine interior life was, by any observable measure, intense, and the training that demanded its full deployment suited her. Broadway followed. She appeared in A Man for All Seasons, After the Fall, and But for Whom Charlie in the early 1960s, working with serious directors in serious productions. She was, in these years, building the foundation of a craft. She was also building the specific professional identity, the reputation for commitment, for intensity, for the absolute prioritization of the work, that would define how the industry understood her for the next 50 years. And then, in 1967, Bonnie and Clyde arrived and changed everything. Bonnie and Clyde and the Arrival of a Star. Bonnie and Clyde, directed by Arthur Penn and released in 1967, was one of those films that shifts the landscape of an entire medium. It was violent, sensual, politically charged, and technically audacious in ways that the American studio system had not previously produced, with this combination of qualities in a single film. It starred Warren Beatty as Clyde Barrow and Faye Dunaway as Bonnie Parker, and the two of them together created something that audiences and critics recognized immediately as genuinely new. Dunaway's Bonnie Parker was not the sanitized version of a criminal. She was fully human, bored, yearning, sexually present, capable of violence, capable of tenderness, capable of the specific kind of romanticization of danger that the real Bonnie Parker's own poetry had documented. The performance required Dunaway to hold multiple contradictory qualities simultaneously and make all of them believable. She did it with a specificity and a commitment that had critics reaching for language that went beyond the usual vocabulary. She was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress. She didn't win. The award that year went to Katharine Hepburn for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. She was 26 years old, nominated for the Academy Award, and the most talked about new actress in American film. Whatever the rest of her personal life was going to produce, the career was announced. The relationships that preceded her marriages were significant in themselves. She had a serious relationship with photographer Jerry Schatzberg, who had shot her for Vogue, and who was himself entering a career as a film director. And then, in 1969, she went to Italy to film A Place for Lovers opposite Marcello Mastroianni. Mastroianni was one of the great European film actors, the Italian face of mid-century cinema, whose collaborations with Federico Fellini and Michelangelo Antonioni had made him a figure of international significance. He was also, at the time of filming A Place for Lovers, still married to Flora Carabella, a marriage that he maintained in its formal structure until his death in 1996, despite being consistently and publicly involved with other women. The film they made together was, by all critical assessments, not a good one. The relationship that developed between them during and after the filming was, by the accounts of people who knew them, genuinely important to Dunaway. They lived together. They were in a sustained relationship for nearly 2 years. And then it ended, in the way that relationships with married men who remain married tend to end. These experiences, the Schatzberg relationship, the Mastroianni affair, gave Dunaway specific and not entirely comfortable knowledge about love and its complications before she arrived at either of her marriages. She was not a young woman with romantic illusions. She was a woman who had already learned, through specific and personal experience, how relationships between people with large careers and complicated circumstances tended to operate. Chinatown, network, and the years before the first marriage. The early 1970s were the years in which Faye Dunaway became undeniable. Chinatown in 1974, directed by Roman Polanski, written by Robert Towne, starring Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway in one of the most sophisticated and layered film noirs ever made, was the kind of film that the word masterpiece is reserved for. Dunaway played Evelyn Mulray, a woman whose secrets are more terrible than anything the detective she has hired can initially conceive. The performance required her to hold enormous concealment while simultaneously projecting fragility and desire and the specific quality of someone bearing an unbearable weight. The film won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Dunaway received universal critical praise. The image of her sitting poolside at the Beverly Hills Hotel the morning after the ceremony, photographed by Terry O'Neill, who would eventually become her second husband, became one of the most iconic photographs in the history of Hollywood. Network, in 1976, directed by Sidney Lumet and written by Paddy Chayefsky, gave her the role of Diana Christensen, a television network executive who treats the news and human suffering as programming material, who is entirely consumed by the ambitions of her career. The performance was brilliant and disturbing in ways that have only grown more relevant with time, as the media landscape Chayefsky was satirizing has become something even more extreme than he imagined. Dunaway won the Academy Award for Best Actress. She was 35 years old. She was also, by this point, in a marriage. Chinatown, network, and the peak of a career. The years between Bonnie and Clyde in 1967 and Network in 1976 were the years in which Faye Dunaway became one of the most significant actresses in the history of American film. Chinatown in 1974, directed by Roman Polanski, written by Robert Towne, starring Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway in one of the most sophisticated film noirs ever made, was the kind of film the word masterpiece is reserved for. Dunaway played Evelyn Mulray, a woman whose secrets are more terrible than anything the detective she has hired can initially conceive. The performance required her to hold enormous concealment while simultaneously projecting fragility, desire, and the specific quality of someone bearing an unbearable weight. The film regularly appears at the top of lists of the greatest American films ever made. Dunaway received universal critical praise, and the recognition was deserved in the specific and non-negotiable way of genuinely excellent work. No one watching her in Chinatown was conferring a compliment. They were acknowledging something obvious. She was nominated for the Academy Award for Chinatown. She didn't win. The following year, she appeared in 3 Days of the Condor with Robert Redford, and then Voyage of the Damned, and the work kept coming. And in 1976, Sidney Lumet's Network gave her the role of Diana Christensen, a television network executive who treats the news and human suffering as programming material, who is entirely consumed by the ambitions of her career, who pursues her professional goals with a relentlessness that the film both celebrates and condemns simultaneously. The performance was brilliant and disturbing in ways that have only grown more relevant with time. Paddy Chayefsky's script was satire when it was written. In the decades since, the media landscape it was satirizing has become something even more extreme than he imagined, and Dunaway's Diana Christensen has become less a character than a prophecy. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for Network. The ceremony was held on March 29, 1977. She accepted the award wearing a white halter dress, sitting between Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson. She was 35 years old. The following morning, Terry O'Neill, the British photographer who was shooting her for People magazine, who would eventually become her second husband, photographed her at the Beverly Hills Hotel pool in her robe, with her Oscar on the table and the newspaper headlines around her. That photograph became one of the most iconic images in Hollywood history. The document of what triumph looks like after the event, when the performance is over and the person remains. She was married when that photograph was taken. The marriage to Peter Wolf had begun in 1974 and was, by 1977, approaching the difficulties that would end it. The career was at its absolute summit. The personal life was fraying. Peter Wolf, the rock star and the movie star. Peter Wolf was the lead singer and frontman of the J. Geils Band, one of the premier live rock and roll acts of the 1970s and early 1980s, a band known for the specific energy and commitment of their stage performances, and for Wolf's particular quality as a performer. He was not simply the singer of a rock band. He was a genuine personality. Funny, culturally curious, possessed of a quality of emotional intelligence that the rock star persona sometimes conceals and that Wolf had in abundance. They met backstage at a J. Geils Band concert in San Francisco in 1972. Faye Dunaway was 31. Peter Wolf was 26. The 5-year age gap was not particularly significant, but it placed them at different points in their respective careers. She was at the height of hers, having already made Bonnie and Clyde and the Thomas Crown Affair, and on the verge of making Chinatown. He was the frontman of a successful touring band that had not yet achieved the mainstream commercial breakthrough that 1981's Freeze Frame album would bring. The attraction between them was, by all accounts of people who observed it, genuine and immediate. They were both performers, both people of considerable charisma and presence, both operating in worlds organized around the requirement to be extraordinary. The specific mutual recognition of two people who understand each other's working lives from the inside, who don't need to explain the demands of performing, the physical and psychological toll of the schedule, the particular kind of loneliness that very public careers generate, is a real thing, and it was real between them. They married in Los Angeles on August 7th, 1974. Peter Wolf was 28. Faye Dunaway was 33. The years of the marriage were the years of her greatest films. Chinatown was already released by the time they married. Network came in 1976 and brought the Oscar. 3 Days of the Condor in 1975. Eyes of Laura Mars in 1978. She was working constantly, with the specific intensity of someone who understood that the window of the most powerful kind of film stardom is finite and who was not going to leave anything unexplored within it. Wolf was working constantly too. The J. Geils Band was touring heavily throughout the 1970s, maintaining the road-based career that had built their reputation. Two people with enormous professional commitments and schedules organized around entirely different industries and entirely different geographic requirements. She in Hollywood and on film locations across the world, he on the road with the band or recording in studios, were inevitably spending significant amounts of time apart. The marriage that had been built in the specific intensity of two performers recognizing each other was now being lived in the particular difficulty of two performers whose careers didn't allow them to be in the same place. Wolf later described the marriage, in the candid and affectionate terms of someone who had come to peace with what it had been, as a relationship between two people who loved each other and whose careers always came first. He described her as very determined, very talented, someone he had genuinely loved. The warmth in how he spoke about it, in a 2025 Billboard interview connected to a memoir in which he wrote about the marriage, was unmistakable and clearly real. These were not two people who had ended in bitterness and recrimination. They were two people whose shared life had not been able to survive the specific geography of two enormous careers pointing in different directions. The divorce was finalized around 1979. Dunaway was beginning a new relationship with a British photographer who had been in her orbit for 2 years. His name was Terry O'Neill. He had taken the most famous photograph of her career, and the marriage that followed was going to be considerably more complicated than the one that had just ended. Terry O'Neill and the photograph that preceded everything. Terry O'Neill was, by the mid-1970s, one of the most celebrated photographers in the world. He was British, born in 1938 in Romford, Essex, the son of a carpenter. He had discovered photography by accident. Working as a ground steward at Heathrow Airport in the early 1960s, when he took a camera to work one day and captured an image of a flight crew that a Fleet Street picture editor recognized as extraordinary, the career that followed was built on a specific quality of access. O'Neill had the ability to be present in rooms where famous people let their guard down, to capture moments that the formal portrait session never produced. He photographed the Beatles in their Hamburg period. He photographed the Rolling Stones across decades. He photographed Audrey Hepburn, Brigitte Bardot, Raquel Welch, and essentially every major cultural figure of the 1960s and 1970s. He was a presence in the world that those figures inhabited, not exactly one of them, not exactly outside them, but the person in the room with the camera whose job was to see them more clearly than they sometimes saw themselves. The photograph he took of Faye Dunaway on the morning of March 30th, 1977, is the one that made his name and hers intersect permanently. She had won the Academy Award for Best Actress the previous night. For Network, the role of Diana Christensen, the performance that defined the peak of her career. The next morning, O'Neill photographed her at the Beverly Hills hotel pool, sitting in a chair in her robe, surrounded by the detritus of the night's celebration, with the Oscar on the table in front of her. The photograph is one of the most reproduced in the history of Hollywood photography, a document of the specific quality of the morning after triumph, which always contains something more complex than simple joy. O'Neill had originally been hired to photograph her for People magazine. The professional assignment became a personal acquaintance, became a relationship. They were in each other's orbit from 1977 onward, and the relationship that developed between them was serious before it was formal. It was also, for a period, complicated by the fact that O'Neill was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife, Vera Day, a British actress with whom he had 2 children. Dunaway later described keeping her pregnancy with their son secret for precisely this reason, not wanting the birth of a child to be tangled in the ongoing proceedings. Liam Dunaway O'Neill was born in 1980, 3 years before his parents married. Faye Dunaway was 39 years old when her son was born. She had been performing since her early 20s, had organized her entire adult life around the demands of her career, and had arrived at motherhood in the specific way of women who have placed everything else first, and find, when they arrive, that the feeling they encounter is the one they had been missing. She described wanting children in interviews with an emotional directness that was unusual for her. A woman who had spent most of her professional life projecting controlled intensity found, in speaking about Liam, something considerably more vulnerable. The O'Neill marriage, London, Hollywood, and the distance between them. Terry O'Neill and Faye Dunaway married in 1983. By this point, they had been in each other's lives for 6 years, had a 3-year-old son, and had built the kind of relationship that extended periods of cohabitation and shared parenthood create. Something more like a life than simply a romance. They moved to England. The decision to relocate from Hollywood to London was a significant one and reflected both practical and personal reasoning. O'Neill's work was rooted in the British and European photographic world. His studio, his assignments, the professional network he had spent 20 years building were centred in London. For Dunaway, the move to England represented something else. a deliberate distance from the specific machinery of Hollywood that had consumed her life for 15 years. The Hollywood that Faye Dunaway had inhabited in the 1970s was one that she had found simultaneously energizing and suffocating. The demands on her time, her image, her body, her availability to the press and the public and the studio system had been relentless throughout the years of her greatest success. London offered a different relationship to fame. She was still famous, enormously so, but the specific quality of Hollywood fame, with its organized surveillance and its expectations of constant accessibility, was less present in England than in California. She continued working. Mommy Dearest, in 1981, made just before the London period, just before the marriage, had been a significant career episode. The film about Joan Crawford, in which Dunaway delivered a performance of extraordinary intensity, had divided critics and audiences in ways that continue to divide them. Some have described it as one of the most committed performances in American film history. Others found the intensity excessive. The film has had a long cultural life. It has been embraced as camp, as genuine tragedy, as both simultaneously, and Dunaway's relationship with it and its legacy has been complicated and at times painful. She has said that she put everything into it. The intensity of the performance was not accidental. In London, she worked on British productions and European films. She was developing the stage work that would occupy a significant part of her career in the subsequent years. She'd always been a theatre actress before she was a film actress, and the return to the stage was also, in some sense, a return to herself. But the marriage was not finding the stability that the relocation had perhaps been intended to provide. Two people with enormous individual identities, both at the top of their respective fields, both carrying the specific weight of years of professional success and its complications, finding in their daily life together the specific challenge that proximity reveals. The accounts of the marriage that have been documented in interviews and in biographies describe something that was real and that was also genuinely difficult. Two strong personalities in close quarters, each with a history of organizing their lives around their own work and their own vision, trying to find a shared life that didn't require either of them to be considerably smaller than they were. They had moved to England partly for the quiet. They found the quiet contained its own difficulties. The marriage lasted 4 years, formally, though the precise end date varies slightly across different sources, most settling on around 1987. They separated and eventually divorced. They remained connected through Liam, a connection that continued through all the subsequent years. Divorce, reinvention, and the long career after. The end of the O'Neill marriage left Faye Dunaway at 46 years old, with a young son, 2 Academy Award nominations and 1 win, the most celebrated photograph in Hollywood history taken by the man she had just divorced, and a career that was entering one of the more challenging periods in the life of any actress. Hollywood in the late 1980s and early 1990s was not, in many respects, a hospitable place for women of a certain age and a certain kind of intensity. The specific roles that the industry offered to women in their 40s and 50s were more limited than what it had offered at 26 and 33. The studio system that had been reorganized around high-concept commercial filmmaking had less patience for the kind of complex, character-driven drama that had produced her best work. She navigated this with the same determination that had characterized everything else she had done. Working steadily, appearing in prestige television productions and European films and stage work, maintaining the career as something ongoing and serious, even in periods when the major studio work was less consistent than it had been in her peak years. Mommy Dearest, in 1981, made just before the London period, just before the O'Neill marriage, had been a significant and complicated career episode. The film about Joan Crawford, in which Dunaway delivered a performance of extraordinary physical and psychological commitment, had divided critics and audiences in ways that continue to divide them. The performance has had a long and contested cultural life, embraced as camp, defended as genuine tragedy, assessed as both simultaneously. Dunaway has maintained that she gave everything to the role, and the visible evidence of the performance confirms this. What the performance meant for her career in the subsequent years was a more complicated question. For a period, the film's reputation as unintentional comedy attached to her in ways she found painful. She continued working through it. She appeared in stage productions in New York and London. She was photographed at events, giving interviews, maintaining the presence that her level of reputation requires. She appeared in Barfly in 1987, a film directed by Barbet Schroeder, based on the writings of Charles Bukowski, in which she played a deeply damaged woman alongside Mickey Rourke. The performance was praised by critics who had wondered if the best of her work was behind her. It was not. The decade after the O'Neill marriage also saw Dunaway develop what would become a significant body of theatre work. She was a stage actress before she was a film actress. The Lincoln Center training, the Broadway appearances in the early 1960s, the Kazan connection, and the return to live performance in her 40s and beyond was also a return to the specific form of discipline that had preceded the fame. Live theatre asks something of an actor that film does not ask. You cannot be cut away from, cannot be corrected in the editing room, cannot rely on the camera to isolate the moment you want the audience to see. You have to deliver it in real time, every night, to a room full of people who are watching in real time. Faye Dunaway had the specific resources that this requires, and the stage was where they expressed themselves most fully. Terry O'Neill died in November 2019 in London at the age of 81. He had continued photographing until close to the end. His archives, among the most significant bodies of celebrity photography assembled in the 20th century, were in the process of being organized and preserved. The morning after photograph, the one that captured Dunaway and her Oscar the morning after the network ceremony, remained among the most sought-after images in the history of celebrity photography. He and Dunaway had been separated for more than 30 years when he died. They remained, through Liam, permanently connected to each other's stories. Faye Dunaway was the subject of an HBO documentary, Faye, in 2024. A film that offered what was described as the most candid self-portrait of her long and complicated life. The documentary presented her at 83, still intense, still fully engaged with who she is and what she has done, still carrying the specific quality of absolute presence that had made her a force in every room she had ever entered. The marriages, the career, the son, the photograph, the reputation, all of it was there in the documentary, available for reconsideration with the specific clarity that time and honesty together produce. What the marriages were made of. Looking at Faye Dunaway's two marriages together, at what they were made of and what they lacked and what they cost, is to look at the specific challenge that fame of her particular magnitude and personality of her particular intensity creates for intimate life. She was, by every consistent account of the people who worked with her, one of the most demanding presences anyone had ever encountered on a film set. Directors described the difficulty of the working relationship and its rewards with roughly equal frequency. Jack Nicholson famously described aspects of the Chinatown experience in unflattering terms. Roman Polanski, who directed Chinatown and who had his own complicated history with difficult working relationships, described the experience with Dunaway as a particular challenge even within that context. Sidney Lumet, who directed Network and who had worked with more difficult personalities than most directors encountered in a career, described her in considerably more appreciative terms. The range of responses to working with her was wide, and the consistency across all of them was that she was not a passive presence. She engaged, demanded, pushed, and required everyone around her to meet her at the level she was operating at. This quality, the total commitment, the high expectations, the refusal to accept less than what she believed the work required, was the same quality that made the performances extraordinary. The tools she used to be Bonnie Parker and Evelyn Mulray and Diana Christensen were not separable from the qualities that made her difficult on set. They were the same thing, expressed in different contexts. The woman who made those performances was also the woman who was not easy to live or work alongside. These are not contradictory facts. They are the same fact. The marriages were organized around this reality. Peter Wolf, who was similarly committed to his own craft and his own band, found in the marriage a mutual respect for the professional dedication that both of them carried, but also found, in the same mutual dedication, the mechanism of the marriage's dissolution. Two people who both put their work first cannot find enough time and enough presence for each other. The mathematics of careers of that intensity don't accommodate the mathematics of a marriage that needs sustained daily attention. Woolf has described the marriage, across the years since, without bitterness and with genuine warmth. He loved her. She loved him. The careers came first, for both of them, and the marriage could not survive the arithmetic. Terry O'Neill understood this in a different way. His own life was organized around being present in other people's most significant moments, around watching, around capturing, around the specific discipline of seeing clearly without controlling what he saw. He had documented more lives than almost any other photographer of his generation. He had watched famous people from closer in than most people ever got. Whether that quality of witness, of patient and perceptive observation, translated into the specific kind of sustained presence that a marriage requires, the presence that attends not to the significant moment, but to the ordinary one, is a different question. The 4 years of the marriage suggest it was a question they could not resolve in a way that worked for both of them. Dunaway herself has been characteristically and sometimes painfully honest about the relationships in her memoir Looking for Gatsby, published in 1995, and in the rare interviews she has given across her later career. She has described the marriages as genuine, as real love affairs that failed for specific and real reasons rather than as mistakes she regrets. She has described the specific loneliness that a career of her intensity can produce, the difficulty of maintaining intimate connection when the professional self consumes so much of the available energy. She has described Liam as the relationship that has given her the deepest and most uncomplicated love of her adult life, the son she had at 39, the child she was not certain she would have, the person who has remained present through everything that has followed. She appeared at the Academy Awards ceremony in 2017 as a presenter, alongside Warren Beatty for the Best Picture category, the ceremony that produced the most dramatic mistake in the event's history, when the wrong film was announced as the winner. Dunaway had read the incorrect name from the card that was handed to her. The incident generated enormous press coverage and was difficult for her in ways that were clearly painful. She described it afterward with a combination of grace and frustration. She was 76 years old and was still, in that single infamous moment, one of the most talked about people in the world. The attention had not gone away. It had never gone away. The woman behind the performances. The story of Faye Dunaway's marriages is, in the end, The story of a person whose entire formation was organized around a specific and enormous kind of excellence, and who found repeatedly that the same qualities that produced the excellence made ordinary intimate life genuinely difficult to sustain. She grew up in an army family, moving constantly, developing the adaptability and the self-reliance of someone who cannot depend on continuous environment. She found, in the theatre and then in film, a world that rewarded the specific intelligence and commitment she had developed, that valued exactly the qualities that the mobile, uncertain childhood had forged. She became one of the greatest film actresses in American history. She also married twice and divorced twice, and the marriages failed not because she was incapable of love. The evidence of the relationships with Wolfe and O'Neill, the evidence of what she has said about Liam, all points clearly in the other direction. But because the life that the career required left insufficient room for the life that a marriage requires. Two people cannot build something together if both of them are continuously somewhere else. Two people cannot sustain intimacy if the demands of the work they each care most about keep them physically apart. This is not a moral failure. It is a practical one, of the kind that the lives of people of extraordinary professional intensity produce with troubling frequency. She made Bonnie and Clyde and Chinatown and Network. She accepted the Oscar for Network in one of the most famous moments in the ceremony's history, sitting with Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson and appearing, in the photographs from that night, as entirely and completely herself. She was 35 years old, and she had made 3 films that would be watched and discussed and taught and argued over for the rest of cinema's history. She also had a marriage that was falling apart, and a new relationship that was beginning, and a son she would have 3 years later, and a second marriage that would last 4 years, and a long life after both of them that she has spent with characteristic intensity and characteristic honesty. The 2 marriages were not the whole story. They were the personal chapters of a life that was, from beginning to end, organized around the specific and demanding work of becoming fully who she was. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.